I'm a transit planner at JAUNT.
Sandy Shackelford, Director of Planning and Transportation at the TJPDC.
I'm Curtis Scarpignato. I'm a planner at the TJPDC.
Sarah Payton with RideShare and JAUNT.
And Will here is our invited guest. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Will?
Sure. I'm Will Cockrell with PRPC, a few blocks away, helping staff with the long range transportation plan. But here to talk about public engagement process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just picked it mid. There we go.
Yeah, can you hear
Says he's still connecting.
So it looks like we have Cindy King with the public relations director of Louisa County, and then we don't have anybody else online, but I think we just themselves.
I made it here, Tom. My computer was misbehaving, but I'm here.
Good to have you. All right, we'll circle back to the rest of the people online. I can sort it out. I don't think we have anybody public. So election of officers. I'm happy to continue serving as chairman if you'll have me. I don't know, Jim, do you want to continue to serve as vice chairman, or do you want to hand it off to someone?
I think in light of my additional and multiple roles, it's not fair for me to continue as vice chairman because it's unpredictable, my ability to be here for every meeting. So I think we'd be better served if someone else was willing. If no one else is willing, I will continue, but I think we're better served to somebody that can definitely make every meeting.
Would anybody like to volunteer to be vice chairman? Oh, Nelson County has stepped into the place. We need to vote on it.
We need we need like an official motion.
All right,
I make a motion.
make the motion. So,
Second,
Jen, you're not officially allowed to participate. Well, actually, they have to vote to allow you to participate first.
okay, all those in favor of my motion to allow Jen to participate remotely, I need a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carried. All right, Jen, you can vote.
great. So I'll second that motion.
All right, so let's, I motion to, for, Dylan, the director of Nelson County to be the vice chairman of Rural Transportation Advisory Committee for, TJPDC. Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Congratulations. I guess somebody probably should note to me if we're gonna have me to be chair.
Move that Tom Edwin remains the chair. Second.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. All right, we have leadership. Sandy, what else? Is there anything else you'd like us to vote on over?
Just the minutes.
Does anybody have any changes that they would like to request for the minute?
Yes, my name is Stone again. It's everyone. But it was even not really, or it's supposed to wait like this evening, and there was.
Wait.
Does anybody else have any other changes?
Okay.
I move we approve the minutes with correction.
A second, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. We're flying through. All right, review of members and alternatives. All right, Sandy, sounds like you're gonna educate us on that part.
No, really Curtis will. Basically, we just wanted to review the list of who our designated points of contact are for the members and designate any alternates that would be voting if the primary member was not available to attend the meeting.
And to be clear, you don't have to do that right now. You can email me and the chair, which is Tom, If you do want to change any of them, just let us know.
For example, I think we still have Ted listed as the representative from JAUNT, and I'm assuming that that is officially your job, Zadie. Or,
Yes.
yeah, okay. Okay.
Will, it's good to have you, sir.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Look forward to your presentation. If you're ready, we'll have it.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, let me pull it up here. Let's go on the cords. Here we go.
Oh,
I know, that's what we start off with, is fancy PowerPoint sliding. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's great to be back. Worked for the TJPDC for about 10 years. So ran this group for that time. And then before that was on the committee with Louisa County. So I guess that's in total 13 years with this group. So it's great to be back here. Y'all did ask me to come in this afternoon and talk generally about public engagement processes. I will say that I currently am a consultant over at UPRPC. We're just a couple blocks that way. We're helping Albemarle County with a comprehensive plan update right now, and then helping the MPO with the LRTP update. So certainly happy to use my experience in that vein to just talk to you about what are some best approaches on public engagement, how to approach it. Also, this past semester, I hit 10 years teaching at UVA, so I've been over there at the, thank you. Been over there at the architecture school for about 10 years. I teach government and I also teach planning methods, and this is actually a big thing that we hit on. So the PowerPoint you're going to see here was just presented to the new group of elected officials for the Virginia Association of Counties, so VACO. So they actually just got this last month, so pretty fresh in terms of engagement processes. So basically what we want to cover this afternoon is really just, basic public engagement considerations. I do want to start hearing from you all of just what are some things you've done that's worked well or not so well, or what's your basic approach, and start from there of what it is you would like to hear. The main thing, if nothing else, I like to emphasize with any engagement process, it's really worth putting in extra time in the front end to really define what that process is. So what specifically is it that you're trying to accomplish with this process? Far too often, I'm guilty of it myself, is planners will just jump into it and say, hey, let's do a survey, let's do some public meetings. And you kind of miss that step of, but why do we want to have a survey? Why do we want that public meeting? What does that mean going to do? What is the outcome? So it's really taking time on the front end to develop a real public engagement plan that they're going to use. So part of that is developing really clear goals. So what are your engagement goals? And what specific strategies are you going to employ to accomplish those goals? Because public engagement strategies, there are a lot of great ones out there, but they should be tailored to what your goals are. Like surveys, for example, surveys are great for certain very specific things. They are not recommended for other engagement goals out there. And I see people using them kind of for the wrong thing far too often, where you're using a wrench as a hammer, as an example. It's just not made for that. And also just talking about measures of success. How do you measure a successful engagement process? And then just a few, just general tips, a few Parks and Recreation references from the TV show Parks and Rec. And that's basically it. So they'll cover about our hour here. So just get started though. What your experience is with public engagement. We just got some good examples here of something you've been doing public engagement wise. Maybe what was something that went well or maybe didn't go so well, and just kind of what's kind of been your experience?
So I have two stories. One, we have a lot of solar projects, obviously, as you're aware, over the past few years. Whether it's a solar project or additional use permit or whatever, we highly recommend the applicant. Kind of have a neighborhood meeting before they apply and do the formal neighborhood. They don't always take that advantage, but a lot of solar projects do. That way you go from 50 people to 15 people at the neighborhood meeting.
Yeah.
Maybe a handful of planning commission. And that helps everybody when you have more than one neighborhood meeting. That helps the applicant craft their application and helps staff understand what the issues are in the community. So my takeaway from that is the more neighborhood meetings, I think you have better. And then when we did our comprehensive plan back in 2018, 2019, we printed to our poster board. And what we did is we ordered a ton of clear plastic, basically clear plastic. I don't know what vinyl or whatever. We sliced it, flip it to the board, and we hand out stickers.
Yeah.
A certain amount of stickers, so people have that haptic feedback of, okay, tell us what your priority is. What is your goal or requirement? Put your stickers everywhere. And then you have to give a little bit of guidance in that, or else there's just stickers all over the place, and then you have to work on tabulating that into a bar chart.
Yeah.
For every community meeting you go to and get feedback. We actually had a group of individuals that had a project they were very passionate about. Hijack a comprehensive plan meeting and hand out stickers. They figure out what stickers we were using. And then they'd hand out some additional stickers and say, hey, it's not on the board. Take the board over here. You can write something in and write that in and put stickers on it. And so that's just kind of a challenge of just keep an eye out for that kind of thing. But haptic feedback or finding a way for people to feel like they're actually involved in the project and they're just not walking around looking at boards. But one of the things I'm excited about you speaking about is there's processes, right? Procedures, but what is something maybe we haven't thought of before? What is the most modern way to go, hey, we're gonna have a comprehensive plan meeting. Do we use Facebook? Do we use Twitter, Thread, or whatever's out there? What is allowed for FOIA, what's not allowed, and because when you're using certain things, that becomes a problem. So that's just my 6 cents. I want to be glad.
No, those good things. A couple of those experiences sound familiar as well. Dylan, how about with Nelson County?
Well, Nelson, as you'll know, we're in pros. Well, we have our full draft now. But it was important for us to make sure that we hit all the areas because there's so many different communities in Nelson that are called different things and have their own identity. So making sure that we got paper copies out there of surveys and materials was very important to our board of planning commission. And using Facebook was something we chose not to do. One of the reasons being that the loudest community that came out to speak is also probably the only ones that are on, social media and happy and stuff. We got together and, compiled a list of churches, community centers, talk to people about, where do people actually go, so then they can come talking there. So it was good to establish those relationships with people at community centers and different locations that, I've been there for 4 years now in Nelson. Met a lot of people that I've never met before, so it's important for us to make those relationships that there's two-way communication and say, hey, we're out of paper copies, how do I get more?
Yeah.
Vanna's experience very similar to Tom's. So we also have a little bit similar to the county. We had one recently, the 4th neighborhood meeting before submitting an application. And it also happens to be an election cycle. So there's a little bit of politicking in the first 2. So we try to address that by having it just be neighborhood specific.
Yeah.
A lot of people will come from all over the county, even though it doesn't particularly relate to their area. Sure. So we try to help the applicants narrow the focus, like Tom was saying, like, how are these specific people going to be affected? What are you potentially offering them or talking to them about to make the experience equitable, right? And so I think we recommend doing public meetings, but I think that's a little overkill. I think 4 is a lot,
It's a lot of meetings.
especially for people out of state.
Sure.
So, and I think you end up doing more harm than good, because then if you don't address the question, you come back and you keep getting asked the same questions, and you're not giving them an answer, then they're getting more upset. So let's take away from that. And then for the comp plan, we did a series of, every couple months, we did public, people come out. We made maps, big old maps, right, for people to put their stickers on and draw on and doodle on and everything. But what it turned out to be was, we would focus on, there's a rural crossroads. So like, what is that? Do you support these kind of developments, the comp plan? And what it turned out being is like, people would see what we were gonna talk about, and there'd be 3 people or there'd be 50.
Yeah.
So instead of it being like, you get community support on, it doesn't have to be about what we're talking. That's just something that we're emphasizing this. I think communicating out that part of the workshop, and there's like, it's not just this one little narrow thing we're talking about in the comprehensive plan. That's what we're focusing, but please, we need feedback on everything.
Yeah.
So getting that message across.
People tend to have their one little issue that they want to hit on, and then they come in and then they say, done, I've done my part, and then walk away. And yeah, sure. Big challenge.
Yeah, for Albemarle, I guess working on partly was like the up to for AC 44. One thing that was, I think for me, most important my job so far is like little news in general, just talking publicly. But one thing I learned definitely was seeing, I guess, planning from a person who doesn't know what planning is. Because I'm in that machine for planners and all stuff.
Yeah.
They're used to that kind of stuff. But like hearing people be like, it's like, yes, this idea for Advocacy Center is like good based off of what planners want, but as a citizen, we actually like, I guess, like the bad planning is because we're more used to that, it's more comfortable for us as well. Kind of learning and understanding and understanding the other side of it as well from, I guess, normal people.
Yes.
That has been a lot of like really eye-opening, because I'm not trying to convince them that they're wrong or anything. So I don't think we should be doing that.
Right. Yeah.
But it's fun to kind of hear what they say, and then ask them why they feel that way, and kind of find, okay, this is what they feel. How can we try to accommodate these aspects of like having community partner that people like, or shopping process? How can we sort of try to incorporate that into some design, even if we don't want to have some giant surface models? So I think it's been interesting with learning about planning from a not planning perspective.
That's a big philosophical question there too, of what's your role as a planner? Are you there to, to educate, use kind of air quotes on that, on certain issues? I know that the planning profession has been kind of beat up a little bit for, we're gonna get the PowerPoint presentation. Now we'll open up the public comment. I just want you to reiterate what I just showed you in the PowerPoint. And that's what I want you to do. I think it's moving a little bit away from that and more of a genuine, what is it specifically that you're trying to accomplish, and what are your objectives?
I think planning toolkits are one of the things for activity centers in the county, and one of the planning toolkits for the people that were there to, I guess, think about AC 44 from the street of kind of what are planning think about, for these kind of things, and trying to educate them from, instead of just like hearing us talk at them, trying to like, okay, here's how we think, here's why we think, and try to apply our thinking to what we would like to see as well.
Yeah.
So I work for a transit agency, like different perspective, but I actually started working at JAUNT during the process of going through with the KFH consultants to do the transit development plan. So my experience with public engagement has to do with the community survey and the rider survey that we put out, which were very interesting to kind of figure out, like, I think Dylan kind of touched on this, like places in each county to distribute these surveys. I mean, some areas, like it was kind of difficult to figure out where do people actually go, where do people actually open this envelope up.
Yeah.
So So as like a control planner, that was a challenge that I kind of was like, okay, I guess this is, you know, I'm gonna take this on and kind of drive around and figure out, you know, from Google Maps or from this area, like, okay, this looks like it would be the best place, but now that I'm here, this is not necessarily gonna be like the most fruitful endeavor to like capture people's attention. So
Yeah.
I think thinking about that and then also learning about like different areas that are doing like, for example, like their comp plans, they have like a website for their comp plan and doing public engagement through that and having like an online survey. That's been interesting for me to think about, especially since a large majority of the people that JAUNT serves are either they're from like an older demographic, so they might not be as technologically savvy, or they might have, you know, different ability levels too. So like one thing I was thinking about, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but yeah, it's very interesting to think about like. I think we had our website redesign probably like 2 years ago, and it's a pretty good looking website, but I do understand too, like. If you're hard of seeing, yeah, it's very different from being like blind, legally blind too. So like, how do we make the graphics on our website more engaging, or if it's a, you know. You understand how do we reach people, but yeah, I think that being a part of like the survey process for that, and then also we've done a lot of work in Greene County to kind of understand like what do people here need, since it was like the most recently not acquired but like incorporated jurisdiction that we've been working with. What do people actually need here? And I don't know, I felt like on a personal level it was very fulfilling to like see people's like written testimonies of how this service impacts us, or like, this is my very specific thing I'm trying to get from here to here.
Yeah.
But
Especially the transit front, it's hard to talk to people about things like high level goals. People don't wanna. They have their need and just take care of that need. It's really hard to get people to do anything other than just talk about those. What is my immediate needs to get to where I need to go?
yeah, I found myself kind of struggling with trying to feel like, well, should I be quantifying how many people have this one need, or should I be, or how should I score these requests?
Yeah.
I guess, I'm interested in hearing.
Yeah. Okay. Anything staff on?
Well, the only thing I would add is I think one of the really important things that I always try to think through is like what are the parameters for where like you can and cannot incorporate feedback. So making sure that you're really setting expectations for what kinds of feedback can be incorporated and acted upon and what kinds of feedback can't. I think that prevents frustration early on. And then also just that some projects, I don't know, maybe this is the wrong thing to say, but some things just are going to get more attention than others. And that's not necessarily a measure of your success or like that you did things right or wrong. Some things are just of greater interest than other things to people.
Definitely, for sure. And something good to keep in mind, especially if you're dealing with transportation related items. That's a tough one. Or if you're going on more technical, like solar, maintenance, that's one area where it's strong. You know, so you'll probably get good attendance there. Sorry, I don't like podiums, so I like to stand behind them. So really, what I try to start off with any process is
I think we can hide that.
really before you start any type of process, I always urge people to just take a pause. It's kind of the old saying of 1 hour of preparation saves you 3 hours of execution. Same thing with public engagement. Just taking that extra time at the front end to really define what it is you want to do here. So first off, you want to identify what type of planning process it is, and there are many different types of planning process. There's kind of the general planning process, which we'll go over in a minute. There are actually specific types of processes depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. So you want to first flag or label what type of process you're pursuing, what is it you're trying to accomplish on the planning, overall process level. Then you do want to really identify what are your engagement goals. So what is it specifically you're trying to accomplish here? A good way of getting that too is to develop a really concise answer to what would make a successful engagement. And that's not just for you as staff, but also for policymakers, the local legislature or the commission, of kind of who is it in that sphere, in that inner circle of people that you're working with. Who are your kind of core clients here that have a real say in defining that success? And trying to really identify how do they answer that question. So if you work in local government, you might talk to your planning commission or board and ask that question directly of them. How would you define a successful engagement process? Imagine we're at the end of this process, we're wrapping up, we're feeling good, slapping each other on the backs and we're congratulating ourselves. What happened that evoked that response? We're trying to really get an inventory of what people's expectations are. And what I like to do is I'm working with the city of Stanton right now on a process, their staff. Great, great town. Planning department is awesome. We had that question on the front end. I said, so public engagement, how would you define success with this public engagement process on this small area? They gave a great answer. I copied that answer. Every single meeting that we had, every staff meeting, it is at the top of the agenda. Word for word, exactly what they say. And we have a meeting and I say, first off, to the top, that's how we measure success. With everything we say from here on is working towards that goal, right? So you need to always keep going back to that. How do you measure success here? So you want to make sure you have that really defined. Well, what is it you're specifically trying to accomplish? What is success for you? How do you define the results? You want to make sure also in the front end, you should never find yourself in a situation, and I have found myself in this situation, but you try to avoid it. You should not find yourself in a situation where you have a community survey, where you have a public meeting, and you've gotten feedback. And then you have that staff meeting and say, okay, so what do we do with this? Like that should not be on the agenda. That is determined on the front of before you launch the survey, before you have the public meeting, before you have the public intercept, before you have stakeholder interviews, before you have the focus groups, that needs to be set at the front end of when we receive feedback on this. This is what we're going to do. And if there's nothing that you can do with this piece of feedback on this question, don't ask the question. Because the relation we focus on a meaningful process. Meaningful being that people's responses and feedback are going to actually meaningfully change something. They're going to alter the process, or they're going to be on the outcome side of the plan itself. If you have no intention of changing something based off of their feedback, if all you're doing is checking off the box, then maybe acknowledge it, but try not to ask the question, because part of the good engagement process is building trust with the community. And they're not going to trust you. They're going to be able to sense from you that you're not really that interested in hearing about this, right? So if you want to measure how are we going to collect the public feedback, how are we going to store it, what are we going to do with it, and how are we going to analyze it? Those are all questions that should be answered on the front end of before you talk to anyone. Once you've decided what your goals are and how you're going to work with that data, because public engagement is data, it's a primary data, it's data that you are collecting. Secondary data is to a sense something somebody else did. But you have to think about public engagement is it's a data set that gets brought in with your other data sets. So it's there to help enhance the baseline data. So you want to make sure that you're matching up the right engagement tools or strategies with your goals. So if you want to have more of an in-depth, deep understanding of what the community is trying to accomplish, survey is not your tool. Don't want to use a survey. So you want to make sure you match up that tool with what it is you're trying to accomplish. And we'll talk about that in the next few slides. You want to have an engagement calendar. What I always like to do is first lay out our planning process as a whole. So what is our planning process? What are our steps? What are our mile markers? And then create your engagement process that overlays on top of that. So let's say like in phase 2, we really need to know from the community what their concerns are. Then you build in issues-driven engagement tools on that phase. So you need to make sure that that engagement activity is feeding right into your planning process, whatever process. So you want to have that calendar out, it needs to overlap and perfectly fit in with your engagement plan, with your overall planning process. It doesn't need to be consistently updated. I was working on, I would say one, but this happens all the time, of working on an engagement plan for a community, had a very thorough plan, and calendar, goal, strategy, and all these things. These are the questions we're gonna ask. These are the types of conversations we're gonna have. I'll talk about the categories of different types of conversations. It was all laid out. And we kept throughout the process getting to these points where the client would say, okay, so we got to figure out what we're going to do next. No, we talked about let me reshare this document. It's all here. It was all laid out. So if you spend time putting together an engagement plan, it needs to be on your desktop. You print it on your desk. You need to refer to it constantly. You need to always go to it. And it's okay to change directions. We do that all the time. We always pivot. But if you're going to take a pivot, then you got to update that in your code. Does that take extra time? Yes, definitely does, for sure. But like I said, 1 hour of preparation saves 3 hours of execution, plus a lot of headaches. Right? So it saves money on the headache medicine. So you want to constantly update it. So again, you want to think of engagement as a data set. So it's going to be your primary data set. One thing I do see quite a bit in localities is they'll have a public engagement process. They'll go out there, they will collect that feedback, and then they'll actually draft policies, recommendations, objectives, strategies coming directly out of that public engagement process. And I commend people for that. That's certainly meaningful if you did something with it. But there should be a lot of other data out there that's going to serve as the foundation for your policy making recommendations and other outcomes. If you're writing a plan and that plan includes environmental policies, I would certainly hope that you've collected data on the environmental conditions. And your public engagement is just some additional data to put in that pot. You're using all of that. It's not just using the public engagement. So you can go a little bit too far, where you're just taking engagement, drafting it straight from that, and then you're moving on. Because public perceptions might not necessarily match up with real needs, right? So you want to get them together and have real needs. So what we try to aim for again is something that's meaningful. So the engagement we get in, that it's meaningful and that it actually influences the planning process for the plan or the outcome itself. We also tend to go more towards a representative process, and that's where we get good representation for the community. And usually some good questions to ask here are who's at the table, who's not at the table. You need to be here. And far too often we find kind of the same faces over and over again. Some of these processes, people that we know, we've seen their face over and over again. I do think, I don't need to beat up on the profession too much here. I do think us as professionals in this field, we've become maybe a little bit too cynical at times, where we say, like, oh, well, the public just doesn't want to get involved. And, what can you do? You send out the notice, they decided not to show up. But I challenge the, local government, the profession to not just accept that. If there's people who aren't at the table who need to be there, you need to find them proactively. It's not like you just throw something out there and wait for the universe to respond. Like you have to go out there and get them at the table. So that sometimes takes, for that representative side, that sometimes takes actually finding those social networks, finding that social capital that already exists. We're doing work out in Danville. There's a lot of churches. There's high church attendance. you bet we're gonna use that as a network to reach people and bring them in. And Stanton, working with the NCAA, NCAA completely. I can't say that, you think about college.
NCAA.
I kept kind of NCAA, yeah, NCAA, sorry. We're with NAACP, trying to get engagement there. So anyway, what are the organizations that are involved in the community? What is that existing social network and how do you tap into that in order to get people to be there? And just not accepting that idea of, oh, we wish we really had Spanish speakers here at the table, but you know, what can you do? Like, nah, that's not acceptable. You have to go out and find. Right. So really focusing in on that. The old measure, really played out measure of engagement success is, and this is the actual terminology, but it's the body count method, and that's just the as many people as possible. So we measure success as like, you see a big number, success, you see a little number, failure. And I would argue that's not how we do things anymore. It's more, is it representative or not? And you have to define what is representative. Now, that might be income, it might be race, it could be political views, it could be industries, it just depends on what your process is. When you're crafting goals, I wouldn't get too caught up on the exact nomenclature here. I've seen it called different things, but the main point is just trying to figure out exactly what is it you're trying to accomplish, right? So if you're dealing on a transit plan, you're doing transit work and doing some like surveying or different engagement, then you really probably want to emphasize more that educate and inform to really help them understand the complexity of, not the full complexity, you don't want to overwhelm people, but a little bit of that complexity of what goes into transit. We're talking about the Albemarle County comp plan process, and there's a little bit of education there too, of this is what comp plans are, this is why it's important to be involved. So that's going to be a part of nearly every engagement process, just how much of that. It's something more technical, then you're going to have to budget more time in that, engagement, that education and information there. I will say it has to be genuine though. When I was in Louisa, I made a visual preference survey. I was trying to like passive aggressively play the role of to educate. And I had like the ugliest Walmart I could possibly find on the internet. And then I had like this nice, pretty parking lot with trees. And so we had a meeting, I said, visual preference survey time. Which one do you like the best? I stacked the deck and they all pointed to the Walmart. Wait a second. Slow down, partner. I think your depth perception is off. I think you meant to speak to this one. Let me go through this again of why this is superior. We went through it again, like, no, Walmart, that's and I was trying to, so you have to be humble, and you have to come into an honest relationship. You want to educate them on certain things, like what's the purpose of the comp. But I would shy away a little bit of trying to instill values in people. That's just typically not the role of government. Try to instill values in people. It's more to provide them with the framework that they can use to get their goals accomplished as a community. So that takes a little bit of that philosophical thought there of what is my role? Am I here to advocate for something, or am I here to help the community achieve its goals? If you're gonna get an advocacy role, especially in local government, it's kind of some tricky territory that you're trying to be a little careful on. A goal here might also be to help the community define what their needs are. So in most planning processes, that's going to be a goal. You might set a goal or some sort of, guiding principle to be transparent and inclusive. That's something we should always be doing, right? So I think getting it on paper, just as a reminder of, if we're going to have a public meeting, if we're going to be talking to stakeholders, what can we do to be more transparent? How do we make sure that everyone knows exactly what we're doing? And then you usually have a goal in here or a phase to review and affirm, as an example. You probably you know, at the back end of a comp plan, so you're wanting the community to review that and affirm like, yes, this is our vision. You know, maybe there's tweaks, maybe there's not. So,
Objective or goal?
you know, again, hitting on skin, but, you know, also, you could break this up into, you know, what are our goals, what is it specifically we're trying to do versus this is how we're gonna do it, so you could lay out guiding principles if you find that's helpful to you. You know, some others might be accessible, you know, just anything we do, we want it to be accessible, not only to one group of people, but to everybody, you know, like, how are we gonna do that? And those discussions need to be hammered out in staff meetings of, okay, we said we're gonna be accessible. We're gonna do this survey, we know that. How do we stay true to this principle here? You really gotta talk through that and have, you know, staff meetings to really get that through. Clear is always an important goal to have, that might be in all your communication, kind of stripping out those terms. Having a conversation this morning about an RFP for NSVRC on the MTP to go into the PIP, you know, and so I started kind of around with this thing, we had a new staffer in the room. And she was really just trying to strip all that out. What is the most basic way we can explain these concepts here? And, you know, many times kind of you'll see the best practice is to aim for like middle school reading level. And that I don't think isn't that by no means is that to talk down or talk over people's heads or anything. No, not at all. You always need to write well is the main focus there. It's something where even someone, you know, in middle school or high school could read it and kind of get a sense generally of what's going on here, of what the ask is too. Because anytime you reach out to the public, send a press release, put up a new website, put a social media post, or whatever that might be, you need to have like some sort of ask in there. The ask is either check it out. That's our ask to you. We want you to look at it, or we want you to comment, or we want you to just be aware of it. Whatever it is, it needs to be a really clear ask of the public when you get something out there. Also want to be clear and apologize. This is kind of a semester's worth of material, like kind of crammed into a PowerPoint. So I apologize for leaping over certain things, but you know, again, a few things to be aware of just in terms of before you really get into a public engagement process. One, public engagement is extremely expensive. Every single scope I've ever seen, that's usually the biggest item on the scope is public engagement. And it really should be that way. It should not be the cheapest thing on your scope, unless you do not want to have public engagement at all. But really, like all this setup, everything you need to do, it costs a lot of money. We had a Danville meeting several years ago, and I think we spent almost $10,000 on that meeting. And that was space, all the staff that were there, we did blanketing with flyers, and all the contact of every single church. We went to every business in downtown, put up a flyer, all the posters, everything. Pretty expensive. We had 0 people show up. We had 2 people show up. David Cook was there with me.
Was he one of the 2?
Well, David was with me. We're outside. There was a meeting next door, and people were going to that meeting. And they accidentally went into ours here. So that was kind of something to keep in mind of. You need to map out what else is on the calendar, on the community calendar, right? But then we went to like a food truck rodeo. And we talked to 80 people, and that was like nothing. Like that was just 8 hours. That was basically it. They just got a table, showed up for 8 hours. We talked to 80 people, got really meaningful. So it's expensive, but really kind of the trick is you're trying to maximize your dollar. So for every dollar spent, what benefit are you getting back out of that? So what's the cost benefit ratio on something? Sometimes on engagement processes, someone might have an idea of, oh, we should do X, Y, and Z. And many times my response is like, yeah, what's the ROI on that? Like, how many people are we gonna reach? How are we gonna meet those goals and objectives with that dollar? Could we do something else that does a better job of meeting those goals and guiding principles that it's cheaper, that we can get more ROI? So it is expensive. I do like to emphasize that every community is different, and you should not have the same engagement approach with any two communities. The approach might end up looking the same, but I always believe you should go in with a clean slate. Don't take what you learned from Pros A and apply it to Panhouse. Like, it might end up being the same, but you need to start over from scratch and figure out what is it, what are their goals, what are they trying to accomplish, what are we doing? Again, like, trying not to come in with any preconceived notions. Many times when I go in and think, oh, what this community really needs is blank. That should try to pull that out of your brain as much as you can, and just go in honest, blank slate, and not try to put your own values into it. You're really trying to hear from the community. At least that might be more of an opinion hat thing, but I think it's important. It really is about the participants, so trying to make it as convenient for them as possible. 4 meetings is a lot of meetings. Too many meetings. So, like I said, especially if you're coming from out of town, like maximizing their time, because it's all about them. So, how do you make their experience as pleasant as possible, as efficient as possible? I remember with the bridge project up here, went to a public meeting. A couple people showed up and they said, I've attended 10 meetings on this bridge. And you're asking me the same question now that you asked me last year. And they showed up purely just to complain about it. Like, the only reason why I'm here this afternoon is complain about that point. Is you've asked me this question so many times and you're asking me again. And how frustrating is that? That should never happen. So really, it's about them. It needs to be built around them. What makes it maximize the comfort, maximize the convenience for them? It is a minefield. I've gone to some communities where a certain term is perfectly acceptable. I've gone in other communities where that same term ignited, a long discussion that took us way off track. We use the term food deserts quite a bit. We've done a lot of food systems work at EPR. And I went to one community and I used the term food desert, and that was not the thing I should have done. And that got me very angry. And I had no clue. But a quick phone call with the planning director, a few phone calls with stakeholders ahead of time would have revealed, don't use that term. But I didn't do that. So you have to really kind of map out what are the sensitive spots here and what should we try to avoid. And then, consensus is hard. I do think there is consensus that's possible where not everyone's going to be happy or true, but hopeful that you at least come away with something that people can live with. I do think that's possible. And that is only possible when you bring in people who are actively against you in your process. You just have to kind of bring them in and put some sort of out of bounds markers in so they can participate but not throw the whole process off. I do think that's important. Okay, so different types of data. So again, we want to think about engagement as data, right? So we use data in order to analyze data to create information. We analyze data to create information. And then we take that information in order to make clear decisions, right? So decisions should be based on good information, right? So what type of data are we trying to collect to give us the information that we need to make the right decisions? There are differences between those things. Right? Data by itself is meaningless, it's just a bunch of numbers, that's it. A bunch of numbers in the spreadsheet. Or it's just a bunch of words on a piece of paper, it's just data, it's just stuff. But you have to analyze that data in order to make it meaningful so that decision makers know what to do. So what we have here, just a few examples. One is detail. So detail is basically the amount of information that you can collect on any given piece, any topic or any issue. So trying to collect as much information on that as possible. So the independent parts that make up that issue, trying to learn as much as you can from your detail. I will say, detail is important, so it helps you understand what is going on in that community. And what exactly it is that you need to do as a community. Surveys are good for detail. You're just trying to collect as much information as possible. So surveys are good at that. Surveys, you can reach a lot of people and collect a lot of information very efficiently. So your cost is pretty low on that. Another piece of data you're trying to collect, my favorite on this one is depth. Some deep meaning of it. So that's your deep data. You have surface data, which is detail. You have your deep data, and that's true understanding. So an example is Cherry Avenue. I'm going to pull up Cherry Avenue with my PDC days. Cherry Avenue, that's right. Sorry, my daughter, whenever you get someone texting me, my kid, no, she's okay. So Cherry Avenue, we did a community survey, and an abundance of people said in Cherry Avenue that they wanted a coffee shop. I didn't know why that was the case. This is weird, because we're seeing this a lot. So we collected a lot of detail on what there's a business which like to see in Cherry Avenue. It's just right down here, just south. I didn't understand what was going on. We followed up with stakeholder interviews. We talked to people, and I asked this question: did you put a coffee shop in the survey response? I'm just trying to understand this. I'm like, yeah, I didn't do that. And I said, you did coffee drinks? Like, no, I hate coffee. I don't like coffee at all. They said, why did you put a coffee shop? They said, well, maybe they're fans of the 90s show, Friends or something. It's like, I just want a place to meet people, like to meet my friends and a gathering place. Like, oh, wait a second. So you don't want a coffee shop, you just want a gathering place. It's meaningful. Where you can meet your neighbors and your friends and your family, and you just have a space together. And you can, yeah, that's exactly what I want. So if you're just going off of the detail, the data we collected and we analyzed, the end recommendation would have been we should develop an incubation program for local entrepreneurs to establish coffee shops on Cherry Avenue. Instead, with this new set of data, you kind of triangulate these different types of data to figure out what's going on. And that recommendation would then change to we need to make a capital investment for a social place for people to meet, maybe improve the existing park, develop space. So depending on how you're looking at the data and how you're collecting it, that could radically change the recommendation for the backside of the process. That'd be the same thing for a transit plan, a comprehensive plan, solar, meetings. It's just making sure that you're asking the question from different angles to collect different types. Because just looking at detail is only going to give you a little sliver of the true vision here. You need to ask it from different angles to really understand. So we have that detail and depth. So depth is just like those layers of meaning. You will not ever be able to collect depth on the survey. Surveys are not made for that. You can't do it. If you try to, you're gonna have a bad survey. Surveys are great at this, not good at this. This is great for like small stakeholder groups, certain types of public meetings, those types of tools. Vividness is another one. We don't use this too much. We did use it Cherry Avenue example, but this is more when you ask questions. You want to hear stories. You want to hear what are their experiences in their community, and that kind of gives you an understanding of just what's their day-to-day like. What does the community mean to them? It kind of gives you a story that you can use to help you truly understand the community even deeper. Like really get that vividness of story there. I like this type of data, not just by what you can pull out of those stories. You can actually pull out quite a bit based off of what they're saying, like lots of themes. But the stories that people choose to tell reveal a lot about their culture of their area. If you're seeing a theme, you talk to 20 people, and you hear that same story of how I pulled off the city. then, you know, that's the story they're picking. So that kind of reveals what are some like vulnerable parts here in the community, and might tell how they resolve problems. It's, you know, that's been proven in the past. They resolve problems by yelling at somebody. So that's a good piece of information to know. You know, so you really learn a lot from like, what are their values, what's kind of their culture with those types of questions. Yeah, nuance is pretty similar to depth, but it's kind of in the back end of just truly understanding the issues and topics front and back, and truly knowing the whole meaning behind. It's complete understanding of it. And part of that also is richness, and richness really is kind of pretty much the same as the depth and the nuance, just slightly different angle of just truly knowing a great amount of detail and data about the community, but also having that meaning behind it. So you're fully prepared to make your recommendations because you completely understand that community. This level of understanding of richness is we're going to require all of these types of data all combined together. So that's going to mean not just surveys, public meetings, stakeholder groups, interviews, like all these layers in order to kind of reach this richness. Yeah, I'll just skim through this so fast. We spend a lot of time on that. So, you know, just knowing that you want to make sure, one, you set in your engagement plan or somewhere you have written down, what is it we intend on doing? What are our goals with this engagement? Well, how do we measure some success? What is a successful engagement process? You're gonna put that at the top of your staff meeting agendas. You're gonna look at it all the time. You're gonna repeat it to yourselves whenever you have a staff meeting. This is how we're measuring success. Are we on track, or do we need to adjust? And then you're also going to define what types of data do we need when we talk to people. So what types of do we want true understanding and meaning and depth here? Part of that kind of depends on the type of process you're employing. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Then what you'll do is you're going to match up those strategies with your goals. So there are a lot of different ways you can reach out to the community. They all have different strengths and weaknesses to them. The most basic set of engagement is a public hearing. So you have a rezoning case, it goes to the neighborhood committee, it goes to the planning commission, it goes to the board of supervisors. You have to advertise it, people show up or they don't show up. You've accomplished this check mark. We have done public engagement. And I worked in a lot of places where that is how they define success in public engagement. I had one person tell me, I don't want anyone showing up for the public hearing. And I don't want anybody talking out against it. And if that happens, then that's success for me. So it's a pretty low bar. But that's like the most basic legal bar you have to hurdle there. Another one might be just like a public presentation. You go to the community, you go through a PowerPoint, you've now informed them most basic level of engagement. It could also be just like public notices, press releases, just really basic stuff. That's kind of your base level. So people kind of want to step it up a little bit more. Just one step up, you've got obviously surveys. I personally think surveys are a little bit overused because they're not very expensive and you can reach a lot of people. That's so tempting to do that. But you just have to make sure that what you're trying to accomplish in that survey is serving what it is you need in the overall process, right? Surveys are great for reaching a lot of people. Surveys are great for identifying issues or problems. What are people's concerns? And they are great for just getting details, just getting a lot of information. They are not great at identifying or vetting goals. They're not great or good at all at providing any depth or meaning to any of the information you're trying to learn about. Interviews, that is on the other end of the spectrum, more intensive. You're talking to people one-on-one or two-on-one or just small groups. You're going to have a clear set of questions. They're going to get a lot of deep understanding of it, but you're not going to reach many people. So I always recommend having community interviews, stakeholder interviews, and surveys kind of merged together, because you can get a lot of data, a lot of detailed data here, and then couple it with kind of deep understanding with those interviews. goals. And they can work together quite well, give you the detail and the technical. Also in that, like stakeholder discussions, you bring in folks who represent certain parts of the community. That's great for vetting goals, like a goal-driven process, vetting for those goals. That's a great tool to use there. Public intercepts, so you set up a table at a community festival. If lock-in was still a thing, I guess that's gone, right?
No,
Oh, it's fine. Oh, it's like that.
they're renewing their special use permits tonight.
Oh.
So
It's very timely then.
I don't know when the event.
I don't know, that might be a little too extreme for like a table.
You did one at the Livingston Street.
Oh, you did, okay, that's better. So yeah, to get out there, I will say, put parameters in your expectations though. If you're at an event, people are not gonna wanna sit there and talk to you about what are your 20-year vision goals. No, it's not gonna happen. You gotta be ready and prepared for what are just some quick, like 30-second questions. You might get one response on one question, so you gotta maximize that. So what is it you need to know? They're great for identifying issues, problems, gripes, as you will. So going more like an issue-driven part of the process, there you go, that's perfect for that. But don't expect anything beyond that. In terms of public meetings, it's kind of a mix. I mean, you reach more people than you would with an interview, but you're not going to reach as many people as you would with the survey. Keep in mind that there are many different types of public meetings. So when you're in a staff meeting and your boss or someone, planning commission member or somebody says, you know what, we need to have a public meeting. My response is always, wait, okay, what type of public meeting? Because there's a number of them and they all do very different things. Open houses are very successful, especially in the back end of the process. If you have something to present, you have, this is what we've come up with, this is our plan, these are recommendations. We want you to review all this information and to give us your feedback on it. So those are great for certain times in the process. With the LRTP, I think it works there because it's a really data heavy process. And trying to convey that through like a presentation isn't going to work so well. But for like a comp plan, typically, like kicking off a comp plan with an open house, there's weaknesses there because you need to have something to present to them. So I see people forcing open houses in the wrong spots. Public forums, kind of usually for those, it's you're giving a presentation and then you might have some sort of community discussion there. Those are good for the education and inform goals on your public engagement plan. You might not be getting a lot of good feedback back though. It's not like a great forum for that. Town hall is pretty much the same thing. You're up in front of the crowd, you're speaking and presenting out, but you're not going to get any depth at all, any nuance, any vividness, any richness of data back. You might get a little bit of detail response, but you're just not going to make your apply. So if you're keep going for the public and you're complaining of, man, the public, they show up, but they just don't say anything. You might have the wrong meeting that you're trying to run there. You gotta pick the right one. Workshops are great for that depth here. You have everyone come in, you break out small groups, you have really great discussion there. Workshops aren't as good at educating and conveying information, but they're really good at getting community feedback. They're really good at getting really deep, like what is it the community really wants, what do they mean when they say the things they need. So it's really good for that part of the process. Charrettes, that's an architect thing. I don't. You're drawing on stuff. It's like a workshop for us. In terms of like groups, you know, I will say if you have a group involved with your process, be really careful. You got to manage them really tight. There are obviously, you all are aware of these, but there's steering committees, focus groups, stakeholder group meetings, subcommittees, the governing body. I think it's always good to, they don't need their own charter or something that formal, but something that really defines what is this group and what are the limits of its agenda. So what is it there to do? Steering committees are there to steer. They're there to steer a process. And that's what they should be doing. They shouldn't be doing anything else. You should not be getting into technical things and trying to get feedback on technical matters. That's not their role. You're steering that process. Focus group should be focused on specific topics and issues. But from a staff perspective, I like to lay out who's on there and kind of what are things to keep in mind. I just kind of bullet point out of how are we going to deal with the governing body? And what are some issues of dealing with? What are some of our talking points for these different groups? I'm trying to rush this just because how much time do I got?
We can. I think the rest of the agenda is pretty light. We could do another 15 minutes if you want to. Is that if you all are enjoying this?
So I do think also when you go out and talk to people, I see this all the time where people will say, well, we're gonna get in the community and talk to them. We're gonna have a meeting with the community. We're gonna have a conversation, a combo on this issue. We want to learn from them. And that's great. But I really encourage you, when you go out there and talk to the community, how are you going to talk to them? What framework are you going to use for that conversation? So I think it's really important when you go out there, you have that interview, that stakeholder group discussion, that community meeting, whatever you're engaging. What type of framework are you using? So what is it you're trying to accomplish? Again, go back to the goals. What are you trying to accomplish? Go back to the guiding principles. What are you trying to accomplish? So there are 3 structures that are typically in place for any type of conversation that you're having. One of them is called opening the locks. The other one is called tree and branch. The other one is called the river and the sheep. So those are the 3. I'll describe them. So the opening the locks, that happens early in the process. So any conversations you're having with the community early on, having kind of these more one-on-one discussions, stakeholder groups in particular, interviews in particular. You're typically going to gravitate more towards this type of discussion. And your only objective here is to keep them talking as much as possible. You're not going to really facilitate that discussion very much. You just want to learn as much as you possibly can about the community, the neighborhood, your sample frame. Sample frame being your target audience. Who's your sample? It's good to define that too. Who is your sample? Who's your comp? In a comp plan, you might say, oh, it's residents of Nelson County, but what about business owners who don't live there? What about visitors? What about this segment? Like your sample frame for your clients that coming in missed out these processes. They're still important. So you define who that is, and then when you have those conversations, early on, those conversations are going to be designed just to get them talking. You want to learn as much as you can about the landscape, what people are thinking. When you have these conversations, the questions you're going to ask are, you're going to have 4 questions. And 4 questions are going to be, you know, whatever it is you're trying to generally learn about, but talk to me about the community. What is it you like most about the community? What are some of your, like, very basic questions? And your only follow-up or probing questions is, why don't you tell me more about that? That's what you're doing, and you're trying to get them talking. This can also help, if you talk to enough people, it can help you flag certain issues. So, oh, this seems like an interesting topic. We need to learn more about that in round 2. In that round 2, or kind of that next thing, is once you progress a little bit more in your engagement process, you probably want to switch more to a tree and branch discussion. Tree and branch means that when you have discussions with people in these interviews, you pick like 2 or 3 things that you want to learn as much as you can about those things. So if you're doing a transportation plan, you're talking to people in the community, you might want to, of all the world of transportation, you might want to zero in on kind of what their thoughts are about bike and pedestrian infrastructure and what their thoughts are on transit. And you might want to kind of focus in on those 2 areas. So with those discussions, you're going to have, you know, a handful of main questions like, what are your thoughts on this issue and that issue? These types of discussions are really about, you're starting to, your facilitation is starting to really tighten up. And you're gonna keep them on those two topics. And I run into sometimes where, sometimes early in the process, people will tell me, they really didn't really facilitate the discussion much, just kind of let them go. And it's intentional, it's like, yeah, because we're in this phase. And then they get a little surprised with that next phase, I start tightening up those discussions and get it really tight, and I don't let them stray. I'm like, no, you're on this topic, continue. So tree and branch, you move up the trunk, and then you try to advance as far up into these two issues to get true depth, nuance of those issues. First one is detail, second one is depth and nuance. We really try to understand. And the last one is the river and channel. You find that hot button issue you really need to dive into, you need to probe into that as much as you can. That's where, like a river, you go down the river, you go upstream, you keep going until it's not an active flow, right? So you find out one issue that's really a hot button topic, and then you get to that stage, you talk to the stakeholders in the community, and you have the tightest facilitation that you can, and you just keep them on that topic, just as much as you can learn about that. That can come in handy with like a comp plan where, you know, you might be shifting from chapter to chapter and you get into an environmental one. So your conversations with people tend to kind of shift over like a tree and branch or river and channel, because you're starting to focus in on certain chapters. Early on, this might be kind of free flowing conversations, but that follow-up conversation or that new set of conversations starting to really tighten. So you can see this in like email structures, survey structures, discussions, your interviews, stakeholder discussions, just how you talk. The process should change. I'm very close to the end. Just like a couple minutes, few minutes. So
You do it.
so yeah. So first, you know, we always want to, in the engagement process, we want to go back to what is our planning process that we have in place. Planning process might be a little different depending on what you're doing. If you're doing a solar work, that's going to be different than a comp or than a transit or whatever it is you're trying to do. But if you start off just from the textbook planning process is generally like this. First phase, your pre-planning phase is when you're kind of, before you really get into the process, is trying to really identify what is it specifically we're trying to do with this bigger process. Comp plan. Why are we doing that? Why are we doing a comp plan? We could say, well, we're required to because of the 5-year update. The state of Virginia requires that every 5 years. But is there a secondary reason? Transit development plan. We could say, oh, we've reached our 5-year update, so we're supposed to do it, and that's why we're doing it. But there's usually a second answer to that question. We're required to do it, and also the community's changed a lot. We need to recognize that, or you know, people's transit demands have changed, or people's perceptions on this issue have changed. So you really need to define on the front end. And what's your vision statement for the process? What is it you're trying to accomplish? You might lay out your scope of work, obviously. Scope of work is kind of this pre-phase here to have that in place. I personally like charter plans, so it's a plan. But if you're doing a comp plan update that lasts like 2 or 3 years, like yeah, that makes sense to have a plan for that. And like a charter document that really lays out what's our vision statement, how are we going to conduct ourselves, these are our steps, this is who's involved. If an emergency happens, this is who you contact. If there's a media story that blows up in our faces, this is our emergency list. You have a red folder that's in there. That's kind of everything went wrong, what we do next. So if you're out sick that day and somebody else is in there and that story blows up, and that's happened. Remember when I was here, that happened a few times. One story came out that the PDC was trying to put in toll booths. I don't remember that. You PDC doing toll booths on Free Bridge. So that was like something that needed a quick response. So kind of like that red folder in there of if something goes wrong, you know, if that person's not here, you can check down to what are your talking points, how do you deal with this. And you might say that's extreme, but when you have a comp plan process, that's $200,000 and it could all go wrong because of one bad thing. It's a pretty good investment, right? So you're planning for, when you get into the actual process itself, you're always going to start off with the data gathering and analysis. Any policy recommendation, anything should be based off of data. So finding the right data, organizing it, you have a data management policy or plan, and then analyzing that data correctly and come away with the right data. That's a whole other, there's like 3 lectures on that one. I'm not going to bring it, you only have -2 minutes left, so we'll jump over to the next one. You use that data to identify issues. So what are the problems in the community? So what is it? What are the deficiencies, problems, issues, concerns that you're trying to accomplish in the planning process? So when I was talking earlier about issues-driven processes, comp plans are good for that. Public intercepts are good for that. This is a great time in your planning process to implement those strategies. So I've got your survey here, and public intercept here. That's a good area. Once you have all the data and you've analyzed it, you've determined what are our needs or issues. That's a good time to really get into goals because you understand the issues enough. Have enough, you're starting to develop a little bit of detail, a little bit of depth to really be able to start to craft those goal statements. Goal statements, as we mentioned, are surveys good for that? No, they're not. But what is good for that is like small focus groups. So like small focus groups, it's a good time to layer that into the process. The small groups discussions are great for goal development. Then you move into, you develop different alternatives to solve that problem that you've identified here in your data-driven process. So what are different ways of accomplishing or solving this problem? Goals should help you develop what are those alternatives. Our goals are to be environmentally friendly. So our recommendations are going to be, those goals are going to shape those alternatives, right? And then you evaluate those alternatives and you start to select what is our preferred solution for all of these. And then you have really your plan together. Plan is the top. Then you go to implement those solutions. Plans are nothing unless you do something about it. Just a piece of paper. When you finish the plan at this stage, you get really happy. Yeah, man, it took me 3 years. Like, did it. But you just got to the start line, not the finish line. You haven't done anything other than you just said what it is you're going to do, but you haven't done it yet. So you just driven yourself to the start line, and now it's time to actually do the work. Then you always monitor it and you start. So that's our planning process. So it should be really layered on top of that. Last slides. So there are different types of planning processes. These typically line up with the different steps in the planning process itself. Comprehensive plan is going to include all of these. If you're doing like public hearings, like solar ordinances, it's going to include a couple, but not all of them. If you're doing a transit plan, depending on what you're doing, it could just be one of these things. It just depends on what it is you're doing. That's defined through your public hearing. So first off, it's trends driven. So a trends driven approach is really data heavy. There could be a lot of transit plans that can fall into this category. Transportation in some parts fall in this category. Any planning process that early step data collection and analysis, it's going to be a trends driven approach. So it's really data heavy. You really don't want to go out there and ask the community, what do you think are safety problems in the community when you already have all the data that already tells you what the safety. So you have to be a little careful. You typically don't have much engagement with the trends-driven approach. So those are pretty light on the engagement side. You might be asking just some general questions about issues or to help you search more on the data side. There's not much engagement on that. Let's see here. This is almost last slide. Opportunity driven, that's more when you've got you might use that a little bit farther in the process when you develop those different alternatives and you're trying to select which of these alternatives are our best one. These processes are really heavily facilitated. You're basically saying, we have these options before us. Which of these options is our preferred option here? This could be a separate process altogether, just for one individual project where you're just trying to make selections here. So here they're really highly structured discussions, engagement processes. I have a whole other discussion here, which I won't go into. Issues driven is classic. That's one everyone loves. It allows everyone to just write and complain about everything. So issues driven is just you're purely trying to just identify what are the problems about. So for issues driven process, you can figure inventory the concerns. Surveys, awesome for that. Certain types of public meetings can be very good for that. People can just kind of get their concerns out there. Public intercepts are perfect for this. It's a great time for that. You're trying to get people to complain as much as they can. And you're trying to get it all down on a piece of paper. And this is not very structured. This is just like, what do you want to complain about? Boom, go. So it's more like an opening the box type of thing. You're just trying to learn as much as you can. Detailed, not as, maybe not that. Goals driven is this classic planning approach, and you're trying to develop what are those goal statements. That's kind of a tricky one here. You do not try to craft goals based off of a survey. Surveys don't capture them. Public meetings, that's kind of a hard place for that too. The best place for this is like small focus groups, like small stakeholder discussions, because you get people to sit around and really talk about it. I would caution you, this actually can be pretty insulting. We try to involve like, in terms of equity, like let's lower income households, let's bring them in and get their opinions on this. People can actually find this a little bit offensive when you go to somebody who's just trying to get through the day, who just living paycheck by paycheck. And you kind of come in with like your planning tie on and stuff and say, like, so tell me, what are your goal, your 20-year vision for the community looking forward? I can tell you from experience, it doesn't go over super well in certain places. So you can actually be counterproductive with some of the things that we do in engagement processes here. So we just want to be a little careful. Small group discussions. Vision based, I won't mention it. Sorry to have Disney World on this one. But these are when you have one person who just has a vision and they're going to make it happen. There's not much engagement involved because the decision has already been made. So Walt Disney made a decision, he did it. You might have that board member who just said, we're doing this. I'm not really that interested in having much engagement. So this is not really a preferred type of engagement process, but it is one that exists in the textbooks. And then, yeah, I mentioned the new Parks and Rec reference, but just public engagement can be heated, good. Actually, that's a good thing. Conflict is good. There should be conflict. There should be positive conflict. No name calling. But people should get in fights. They need to fight about ideas. That's a good thing. Do not put polished materials out there too early. Number one thing I learned, those early discussions and meetings, you shouldn't have anything in hand, or if you do, it's very sketch kind of level. Putting anything out there that's too polished, that's too far developed, is going to completely ruin the process from the get-go, because they're going to see that and wonder why you even talking. It's clear that you've already made your decision which one to do. So do not go in there too early and polish materials. Don't ask questions that will influence the process. Do not launch a strategy without first having clear reasons why. If you can't answer the question, why are we doing this? Don't do it. Beware committees that can get out of control. Watch the budget. Always thank people attend stuff. Send them an email and say thank you for attending. Like they used up their whole afternoon in their meeting, so yeah, think of that. Yeah, a few people might show up they're really angry. That's not the whole community. City of Charlottesville is 40,000 people. 10 people show up when they're angry. That's not 40,000 people. It's 10 people. So I think it's good to work with your planning commissioners and your elected officials before the process even starts and have that discussion. Philosophically, as a group, if we think this is a good policy, we get an angry crowd in here. How are we going to handle that? If you don't have that discussion ahead of time, I've seen votes flip very quickly once you get to that public meeting chamber because people show up. You need to have that discussion with the decision makers early on. If you don't, you're kind of setting yourself up for some problems. Yeah, so that's basically, I sent a copy of it and we can go and share a copy of the PowerPoint if you're interested, happy to do that. Also happy to answer any questions after today. I come with that information.
Yeah.
I always enjoy talking. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Thank you, that was.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to come and speak with us. Well,
Yeah, of course.
I'll sign up for Will's class now.
You need a certificate from UVA now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can print something out.
You're welcome to speak.
Thank you, sir. That was really good. Smart scale updates, Andy. I thought we just did smart scale.
Smart scale is never ending. It is a circle one. So just so you all can be informed ahead of time, there's an ongoing discussion at the Commonwealth Transportation Board. They're reevaluating the smart scale process. They do evaluate it between every round regardless. But this feels like it's they're considering a more substantive overhaul of some of the processes and scoring evaluation outcomes at this point. So they started a discussion, a pretty significant discussion at their May Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting, where they started reporting out about the history of the Smart Scale program, what its goals were. And I would say it's definitely worth giving that a listen, especially if you're a little bit less familiar with Smart Scale. This isn't something that you spend all your time with. I think it's definitely worth going back to that meeting, and we can send out the meeting links afterwards as well. But they are also going through a process that they are in the middle of right now. So I'm going to share some highlights from their analysis from what they've been considering in terms of adjustments that they may be making. But they're in the middle of these discussions. They're maybe more pending. So far they've had 2 meetings, May and June, where they've had these discussions, and there are ongoing topics that they have identified that are potential issues that they're going to be discussing that they have not discussed yet. Between every single round of Smart Scale, they go back and they do a set of evaluations. So usually there's a survey that gets sent out about user experiences. For this particular round, after round 5, they did those surveys. They interviewed all of the Commonwealth Transportation Board members. They got feedback from all of the state staff and the multiple consultants that are involved in the application development and scoring of the project applications. And so all of the discussions that they're having right now are based on their analysis of the project outcomes, as well as the feedback that they've gotten through those channels. So there's a whole other presentation that I could give on just the background of Smart Scale. So I'm kind of assuming that we're starting at a level where most people have some understanding of it to start off with, but just to orient you all a little bit, there are 4 different area types. And so the different categories that projects get scored on in Smart Scale are weighted differently depending on the area type. So for our region, this area right here in Greene is the Culpeper construction district, and then Nelson is in the Lynchburg construction district, but at least you're in the same area type. So the purple area is the Charlottesville Albemarle MPO, and you can see up here we're type B. So that is the amount of points that all of our projects get based on those scoring criteria. You can see how each of those scoring criteria are weighted for type B. And then everybody outside of the MPO area is a type C. And so there's a slightly different weighting that is applied to the scoring categories based on your land use type. You can see the majority of the area is type D. So one of the changes that they made recently was adding a land use score to types C and D. And through rounds 4, type C and D land use types did not get any of their points from land use, and that will be important a little bit later. So these were some of the issues that they identified. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going through this, but it also shows just what the CTB schedule is as far as having discussions about what some of these issues are. The biggest ones that they've addressed so far are looking at biases or perceived biases in the process to determine if those are actual process outcome biases. Looking at the funding steps, which I'll explain a little bit more detail, and then also talking significantly about the land use factor and what is referred to right here as the one factor majority. And that's because a lot of projects are being funded because they're getting really high land use scores, and that is having a maybe outsized impact on which projects are selected for funding through Smart Scale right now. Also, I just wanted to tell you that this is probably 3 hours of CTV presentations that I've really tried to condense down. So if this is something that's interesting to you, I really want to encourage you to follow those meetings. If not, I hope this at least gives you some context so you can be informing your localities as you kind of start thinking about potential Smart Scale applications coming up. So again, after every single application round, they do an analysis. And so these were some of the potential issues that they identified. The first thing that they looked at is just as far as the process of developing the applications and the amount of staff and consultant resources that were being invested into the preparation of Smart Scale. So the first line right here that says that it's a 50% bigger 6-year improvement program, but it has the same staff, is basically saying that the workload has increased by 50% from which it was originally conceived of and put into implementation, but the staffing levels have remained the same. So there's a lot of a workload that's being applied to staff, and they're having trouble keeping up. They don't have the capacity to really maintain the program as they had previously. Looking at the application readiness, over 50% of submitted applications are not ready for scoring when they are submitted. So basically, there are still outstanding tasks that need to occur in order to finalize the projects. I don't know about you all. I know we experienced that at the MPO where we're waiting for final cost estimates to come through from VDOT and things like that. So they're just the applications are not at a point where they're ready to be reviewed when they're submitted. One thing that they mentioned at the CTV meeting that's not reflected in the slide is that the same consultants and staff that are preparing and scoring the project applications are also the same staff that are charged with actually delivering projects. So they're the ones who are, doing the public meetings and doing the preliminary engineering and designing the projects and then creating the construction plans and things like that. So it's creating this backup where it's going from the application evaluation and review to also impacting the project delivery schedules. So out of, in round 5, there were over 400 applications received, and there were 150 projects that were recommended for funding. So the overall success rate is about 37% of the projects that were submitted were recommended for funding. And their data showed that entities that submitted more applications were not necessarily more successful in having funded projects. So those were all some of the issues they were identified as far as the overall project application process.
That's a question.
Yeah.
Of the 37%, does that include the projects that are not ready, or is that just projects that are ready now?
That is all projects that were scored.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that went through to receive a final score. Yeah. I don't think it includes projects that were pre-apps that were not developed into final apps. So in order to address some of those issues, one of the things that they're talking about is reducing the application cap for all entities. So right now, all of us in this room, our agencies, have the ability to submit 5 pre-applications and 4 applications. There's a discussion about potentially reducing the number of applications that all entities are able to submit. Again, none of this has been decided on, but there are strong recommendations in favor of this. The goal would be to focus on the quality of the applications. So, focus on having those applications ready to submit at the time of the application deadline so that there's not this backup that's occurring. And then there's also some additional discussions around project readiness. And if you want to locally administer a project, whether or not you can develop your own cost estimate or whether or not you would need to use a VDOT validated cost estimate. I don't think that this applies to anybody in this room, but if this does apply to anybody in this room now or at any point, you may want to talk to your staffs about that. And then and that's the same thing for number 4 too. If you're locally administering projects through Smart Scale, there has been some discussion about tying sort of the consensus funding as far as recommending funding for your projects to how well your previous performance has been in delivering projects in the past. So the cap limit, so for our area, we're in tier 1, so we're all under 200,000, and our MPO and PDC region is under 500,000. One option that they're talking about is reducing the full application limit from either 3 applications or 2 applications. And there is stronger support to reducing that to 2 applications per entity. So one of the things, so this is just an analysis of what that would look like if they reduce the number of caps to 2 and 5 for the larger entities. The overall success rate of projects that were submitted and then funded rose to just over half. So from 39% to 53%. There was a reduction in bike ped applications. There was a reduction in highway applications or highway project applications as well. And then you can see over here on the area type, the overall number of applications was also reduced, but it seems to have a slightly bigger impact on the type A and type B land use areas. They're also talking a lot about the types of projects that Smart Scale is funding right now, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but they're talking about the overall cost of the projects that are funded, because there's a concern that the types of projects that are funded through Smart Scale are not necessarily projects that are of high interest to the state. And so they're focusing on what they're considering small or large projects, and small projects are those that are less than $10 million. And so one of the other outcomes that they're evaluating is that if they make this adjustment, it looks like the overall average cost of projects that are selected for funding increases in value a little bit. All right. So again, there's a recommendation to reduce the number of applications to focus on higher quality applications, and the recommendation from the technical work group supports that. So that's likely going to be an ongoing communication. So I talked a little bit about the small project preference, and one of the pieces of feedback that they asked is, are there biases in the types of projects that are selected? And of the external respondents, so that's those of us in this room who do not work for VDOT or DRPT or OIB, or I guess one of the consultants that support that work, said yes, there does appear to be a bias. And some of the areas where there was bias was urban versus rural, large versus small, different types of mode, et cetera. So almost 60% said yes, there's some kind of bias. So they did this whole analysis over what kinds of projects are being funded, small projects versus large projects. And I'm not going to get into all of the details of that, but again, small projects are interpreted as low request projects, which means that the Smart Scale request itself is under $10 million. When you think about leverage projects, so sometimes let's say a project is $10 million, or $12 million, but maybe the locality is putting $2 million towards it. The Smart Scale request is still $10 million, so it would be considered a small project. However, 95% of all of those small projects are actually small projects, whereas the total project cost is under $10 million. So that's what that means. So they're looking at this small project versus large project comparison, and they're doing this in a couple ways. Both the number of small versus large projects funded, and then the amount of funding that is being dedicated to large versus small projects. And it makes sense that there would be more small projects funded because they're just less expensive. But what they've looked at is in Smart Scale, if you recall, there are 2 types of funding programs. There's the funding that is dedicated to each VDOT construction district. And so localities are the only entities that are eligible for those construction district funds. And then there's the funding that goes through the high priority program funding. And so that's where MPOs, PDCs, localities, and transit agencies are all eligible for those high priority program funds. So they looked at how the funding was being allocated between those two different programs. And so you'll see for the district funds, which is this orange and blue column that's on the left in each of these rounds, you'll see that this is pretty kind of, the split wanes and flows a little bit between how much of the funding is going towards small projects versus large, small projects versus large projects. What is important that they're pointing out, my battery's running low, so let's see if I can get through this. What's important though, is that the amount of funding in the high priority state program for small projects has almost tripled since the inception of Smart Scale. And that is concerning because the high priority fund was really intended to fund projects that were of high priority to the state, not necessarily kind of be a fund these like small special interest projects. Not that I'm saying that they're special interest projects, but to have more of a statewide significance. So they did an analysis of this as well, and I'm not necessarily going to go through all of it, but they found some biases that showed that small projects were much more likely to receive funding when they were submitted. And of the small projects, bike and ped projects were much more likely to be funded. So more and more of this high priority state funding has been directed to small bike ped projects. So again, small projects were funded at over 2 times more than larger projects based on their success rate of projects submitted versus projects that were awarded funding. Small bike and ped projects were more successful than small highway projects. Small projects counted for something like 80% of the projects that were submitted. So sorry, my battery just died and I don't have the backups here, I don't think. So anyway, the reason that that's important though is because now they're evaluating what kinds of projects are going to be eligible for the high priority program fund. So what that means is that they are looking at some changes to, they're adding some additional criteria to what types of projects MPOs and PDCs and regional entities would be able to submit. Currently, MPOs and PDCs are only able to submit projects that are, would you mind going to grab my cord? I'm so sorry. It's in my book bag in the front pocket. What that means, and if Curtis is able to get back by the time, I'll pull it up and show you. But what that means is that instead of right now, currently, the regulations state that MPOs and PDCs and transit agencies can submit projects on a statewide corridor significance or on a regional network. It tells us where we can submit projects and where we are eligible to submit projects. It does not tell us what types of projects we can submit. So if you go back and you listen to the CTB meeting, you're going to hear a lot of them say that a lot of the MPOs and PDCs are receiving projects for corridors of statewide significance that are things like turn lane improvements, which what they're saying is that, yes, they're on the corridor of statewide significance. But these are not projects that are significantly advancing the interests of the state in maintaining those corridors. So there are some discussions about what types of, thank you guys so much, of what types of projects, but having better definitions of which types of projects MPOs and PDCs would be able to submit. That, what they are defining that as is as interchange improvements, lane modification, or not lane modifications, but things that add new capacity, new highway capacity projects. So if you actually want to add a road, thank you so much, Ryan. I don't have this. I don't have that connector. I could actually probably put that there. If I was thinking. Transit systems that provide new transit service for transit stations. So having better definitions of what types of projects that MPOs would be able to submit. And one of the reasons that may not impact you all as much directly, but it could impact you, has to do with the way Smart Scale allocates funding and the funding steps of that Smart Scale goes through. So right now, what currently happens is that.
There's nobody on the Zoom.
What's that? Because they disconnected. Well, I don't know that anybody was still on this, anyway, but.
Nope, no one was.
So what happens currently is the way that projects are funded is. But it's okay. Is the first thing that happens is that for all the projects that are, all the local projects are evaluated based on the district grant fund. So you all will submit your projects, and everybody except for Nelson County will be evaluated against other projects in the full power district, and Nelson County will be evaluated against other projects in the Lynchburg district. Projects that score the highest get funded until they run out of funding. So the next step that they go through in the current Smart Skills scoring process is that then they go through and they look at the projects that were submitted by entities that are only eligible for the high priority program, so the statewide funds. And they fund projects that would have been funded in the district program if they were submitted by eligible agencies. So the MPO is not eligible to submit projects to the district fund, but if we have projects that scored well enough compared to the other projects that were funded in the district, those projects would be recommended for funding. That's step 2. Very few projects are getting past step 2. The next step 3, is evaluating all the remaining projects in the state that weren't funded in steps 1 or 2 against each other and creating the statewide priorities. So what CTB staff has recommended is eliminating the current step 2. Prioritize all of the projects within each construction district. Prioritize all of the projects, and then you go straight to prioritizing all of the projects that are only eligible for the high priority funds. And basically you eliminate that step 2. So what that does is it reduces a lot of the projects that are currently being funded because they're not necessarily meeting the criteria for those high priority statewide significant projects. And they're really trying to focus on how do we secure funding for these more expensive projects that will have more of a meaningful impact on the statewide transportation system. The reason I say that maybe may not impact you all directly, but may impact you is because it means that those projects that you all have that meet that criteria for the high priority project funding means that there's going to be a lot more funding that is then on the table to be allocated among projects that actually have that statewide level, like meaningful statewide significance in terms of their impacts, versus just going to other projects that may get those really high scores. The other thing that they're talking about, and I'm sorry this is a little scattered just because I got a little turned around. The other thing that they're talking about is changing the land use score for being a standalone score that is provided to a project, like as a category, and using that more as a modifier to other scores. So they're not taking away what the analysis that they found. And again, I'll send this out, I'm so sorry, is that especially for the bike ped projects, something like 80% of the project score was coming from the land use category. And so it's having a very significant impact on the project outcomes. So instead of having a standalone land use score, they're considering using land use as a multiplier to other scores that those localities or locations might receive. Land use is not necessarily an evaluation of the impact of the project, it's an evaluation of where the project is. So if instead of giving a project a land use score, they're going to basically inflate a safety or access or economic development score by a certain percentage, depending on the land use benefits on where that project is. So all of that is working towards the goal of redefining the high priority program to truly fund what they're saying are going to be these significant projects on significant corridors of state interest. I did do a quick. So if they combine those two solutions related to the highway, the high priority project funding, the average project funding for the projects that were selected went from 30 projects to 22 projects, but the average cost of the project almost doubled from 15 million to 32 million. So that is directing that funding towards those larger, harder to fund projects. And then it reduced bike head projects from 51 to 15. This is kind of significant. This could be a significant adjustment for a region because bike head is very important to the Charlottesville Albemarle region itself. And yeah, but and neither of the projects that the NPO receives would have been funded if these changes are made. So it is something that we want to be thinking critically about to determine what those impacts could be to our region. But that's it in a nutshell. I really want to encourage you all to follow the CTP meetings, but also feel free to use us as a resource if that's helpful and if this is something you need more information about. Which you're following.
It's still 2 years.
Still every 2 years.
So would these changes be in effect before the next cycle?
I mean, they haven't officially adopted anything yet, but I think that's typically what they plan, which might be one of the things that I hope they're talking about in the work group, is some of these changes may need a little bit more lead time in order for us to be able to have applications ready. I mean, the MPO is already talking about project selection for the next cycle. I don't know that they would meet this criteria.
Was the land use for based on the zoning or the actual land use?
No, that's the economic development score that's based on that. The land use score is based on, I don't know if it's actually based on the WALT score calculations, but it's basically based on how walkable or accessible different types of uses are compared to the project. Any other questions? Yeah. I can send out the PowerPoint, but it's really just copying 2 slides from the CPP presentation. Sorry about the technical issue.
Right, so we need to stop, we're no longer recording, is that whatever requirement?
No, we're not required to report it. It just helps with our record keeping.
Sure. So a question for Curtis, do you wanna put your update in the next meeting, or do you wanna give it now?
It's like a 1 minute.
I can do it in 1 minute.
1 minute update.
Yeah.
So I won't belabor you with any of the background on the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant because of the lack of time, but basically we got 7 proposals in from consultants that we are now reviewing. And the selection committee is going to meet this Friday to go through them. We're going to schedule interviews following that, and we should select someone by August 4th.
Okay.
And they should begin working on the project by September.
Great.
So yeah.
So when do you all think you'll be reaching out to higher ups on the locality for involvement in that, or?
After August.
After-
Yeah.
Sometime in
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Curtis.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll start off, planning commission this week has been asked to look at short-term rental regulations. And Louisa County, and as you all remember, that was brought up almost a year ago. The board looked at it twice, and then asked the planning commission to look at it. I will be speaking Tuesday next week at the 53rd annual VDOT conference with PCR, DEQ, Dominion Energy, and Longer Energy, doing a 2-hour deep dive on solar for the conference. 117 slides. So if you're going to the conference, feel free to hang out with me for 2 hours. Well, like 30 minutes of Q&A, and the rest of it's us talking. But other than that, still busy, and no.
We now have the full most recent draft of our comprehensive plan out there for public review now. So we're sending that out. We've got it on our website, 2022.com. There's an idea wall on there that's been active throughout the project and will continue to be. And we're having our open house on August 29th for that. So that's the big thing right now, not a whole lot else going on other than that. I just today got back the final scope for the growth accessibility planning technical systems grant. So we're going to be working on the Nellisburg area growth management plan through that gap TA grant. I'm sure that's already been a few months delayed, but looking forward to getting started.
As a result of our TAP grant, we become our village, we got more engagement from local stakeholder groups. And I met with David Cook and the VDOT folks to go over some items in the village. And I just had a meeting this morning with a stakeholder group, Rotary Club and stuff, to go over what exactly they're interested in trying to enhance about the grants and what they could provide. So I think what it came to be was one of the rest in your rejuvenation station. For like the bike people that come through, like the little purple the Vivo thing, right? It's like manual pump, and all that. So we're like just trying to enhance the grant. The grant is great, and like what it's actually going to provide to the people outside of just a nicer space. I think that kind of a cool side effect of it. I can drill into that a little bit. And I'm going to go talk to them in September and kind of get a pulse, right? We're going to unlock the change or the rivers, or we're going to do all that. Try to get more feedback on what people generally would like to see with this, and then try to go deeper into that. So that's the big thing for me personally. Everything else is kind of quiet. It's always a little.
No support for me at least, I'm not doing that. But we are looking to get the RFP for cross threaded for 3 notch in the next few months. It's more part of the official UA to get that done. 3 routes land progressing. We're waiting for cost estimates and Parks and Rec on next like big gates and stuff so we can close the road. What else is there? Secondary secure plan stuff. The rural roads. There's going to be. We're going to the board. I'm going to the board next week to get the resolution from the board saying that VDOT can start. So you're going to have some of the roads in the county that are unpaved now become paved. Comp plans still churning. What else is there? I think off the top of my head. I think they said we got some smart scales funded, but I haven't seen the funds yet, so I have to check the smart scale as well. We all should see what that funded smart scale. But
For Albemarle from the new round,
yeah, Kevin was just like, no, like I have to check it. So
like new thing.
I just saw that he was just like,
Yeah.
they were just like, we got 3 smart scale transported, and I don't know what's gonna get
And
that.
you said it so nonchalantly, I think we got some part, we got 3.
So I don't know because I haven't checked, but yeah, that's new, I guess.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's right now. Yeah.
So, Sean, we are working on some of the rock designs for the campgrounds. One thing we're working on is we got a grant for like the growing delays. So we are planning to work with Police Station University to conduct this growing testing. So right now we're kind of trying to put together a good people who might want to participate in the community, possibly the stakeholders, like further along in the project. So these are kind of the colorways from every jurisdiction. So anybody suggestions for people we should possibly do. I know I just thought you were. I'm sorry, it's so long. I don't know if you're on vacation or not. You're fine. But
Sarah, do you want to share about RideShare?
Wrapping up the end of the year.
We'll have some new RideShare videos soon.
Save for next.
Albemarle then I have a big blanket thing. But then kind of all the rest of it. That's an interesting one. I think we've had a couple of times.
Have you had 4 yet?
You know, that was the most painful thing I've ever heard.
I did say that our fifth meeting, when we were soul project, included a fish fry, but I think that's. I was not invited to that one, I was invited to the other, I mostly heard the fish fry. No more for me. All righty, well, thank you, everybody. Ideas for next time, this just came to me, perhaps we should get to have a mitigation plan in here and determine whether there are things that, what we do our next round of smart scale, or perhaps in general, with a group discussion, you know, when in 5-10 years, we're have to look at that again, I can remember the cycle. That we actually have some transportation things that put in each one of our hazard mitigation plans that come out of RTAC. That could be either regional in nature or individual, because we're all having the same problem. But we kind of feel know of that. I don't know where it'll go, but I think that we should look at hazard mitigation plan in relation to transportation to this group, see what we can sort out on before the next time we're all at it. And maybe from smart scale we can move.
We'll see, I'm updating the Northern Canada Valley Regional Commission hazard mitigation plans, so I wanted tips on hazard mitigation. After the revised list.
Does anybody else have any other idea? So maybe talk about all the people. Right. Well, all right, we'll shoot an idea so people come up with stuff. Wayfinding, that's good. My planning commission talked about eight ways of wayfinding.
Yeah, y'all know that you come up with these great topics, and then we have to find people who know them well enough.
We know that you have a huge Rolodex of people. Or you just make it up, one or the other. Will, I'd like to thank you for an absolutely excellent presentation. Really good. I got a lot of that. Very fine. I don't think anybody from the public stood up, right? All behind you. Well, with that, I have the motion to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you all next time.
Thank you for your technical assistance, Ryan. Thank you for your technical assistance. Could I do you for a minute?